Living Jeanne Bécu du Barry's life was a journey filled with challenging and unsettling moments. She was known as the last mistress of Louis XV of France, 1710–1774, and through her struggles, Madame du Barry rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most influential women in France. However, her glory was short-lived as she ultimately fell victim to the atrocities of the French Revolution. Madame du Barry, whose birth name was Jeanne Bécu, was born on August 19, 1743, in Vaucouleurs, France. Her family background was considered modest. Jeanne Bécu du Barry was born out of wedlock to a serving-class family in Vaucouleurs, a town located in the Lorraine region of France. Her mother, Anne Bécu, was a seamstress, while her father was commonly believed to be a monk named Jean-Jacques Gomard de Vaubernier. Anne Bécu decided to move to Paris with her young daughter, accompanied by Monsieur Billiard du Masseau, an investor and supplier to the royal army. There, Anne worked as a cook for Madame du Masseau, Francesca, who doted on Jeanne. Jeanne began her education at the Saint Aurea convent. When Jeanne reached the age of 15, she left the convent. At that time, Jeanne and her mother Anne were expelled from Monsieur du Masseau's house, and they returned to Anne's husband, Nicolas Rankin. To make a living, Jeanne began selling trinkets on the streets of Paris. Later, she obtained a job as an assistant to a young hairdresser named Lemetz, with whom she had a brief relationship and, according to rumors, even had a daughter together. Jeanne was then hired as a companion to an elderly widow named Madame de Lagarde but was later expelled when she caught the attention of Madame de Lagarde's married sons. Afterwards, Jeanne worked as an assistant hat maker and recette in the men's clothing shop owned by Madame Labille and her husband. Madame Labille's daughter, Adélaïde Labille-Guiard, became Jeanne's close friend. As depicted at the time, Jeanne was a beautiful blonde woman with thick curly hair and almond-shaped blue eyes. In 1763, when she appeared at Madame Quesnoy's brothel, her beauty caught the attention of Jean-Baptiste du Barry. Her brother, Comte Guillaume du Barry, who also owned a casino, brought Jeanne to his home as his lover and gave her the nickname Mademoiselle Lang. Guillaume helped build Jeanne's career as a courtesan among the elite society of Paris, including the aristocracy. Jeanne quickly became a sensation in Paris, attracting numerous aristocratic clients. She had many lovers, including government ministers and court members, with the most notable being Maréchal de Richelieu. Although Duc de Choiseul considered her ordinary, in 1768 he brought her to Versailles, where King Louis XV saw her. The king was greatly interested and summoned her through his valet and procurer, Dominique Label. The popular Queen Marie Leczinska was dying, and Jeanne was so often escorted to the king's study that it made Label concerned about his position. After sincerely mourning the queen's death for weeks, in June 1768, Louis XV was ready to move on. As a low-born woman and a courtesan, Jeanne couldn't qualify as a maîtresse en titre. However, the king ordered her to marry a man from a good lineage and be brought to the court. On September 1, 1768, with the assistance of Jean-Baptiste du Barry, Jeanne married Comte Guillaume du Barry, the brother of Jean-Baptiste du Barry. Jeanne also had a false birth certificate created, which made her appear 3 years younger and stated that she had a noble background. This forged document was made to create the impression that Jeanne had aristocratic lineage, so she could be accepted in the courtly environment and become the official chief mistress of Louis XV. After marriage, her husband constantly urged Jeanne to persuade the king to present her at the court, but Louis XV asked her to find the appropriate sponsor. Jeanne du Barry needed someone who could sponsor her and help introduce her to the court. At that time, Duc de Richelieu, an influential aristocrat and a key player in the power circle, was involved in finding a solution. Richelieu discovered Madame de Béarn, a wealthy woman with close ties to Louis XV, who also had significant gambling debts. Richelieu seized this opportunity to arrange a bribe with Madame de Béarn. In exchange for settling her substantial gambling debts, Madame de Béarn was expected to help introduce Jeanne du Barry to the royal circle and influence Louis XV to accept and acknowledge Jeanne as the official chief mistress. During the first attempt at presentation, Madame de Béarn panicked and pretended to sprain her ankle. The second opportunity was cancelled when the king fell from his hunting horse and broke his arm. Finally, with the help of Madame de Béarn, on April 22, 1769, Jeanne Bécu du Barry was officially presented at the court, also known as the Court of Versailles. Amidst the buzz of gossip among the masses outside the palace and the courtiers in the Hall of Mirrors, she wore a pearl-white gown with golden brocade, adorned with jewels sent by the king the night before, and with large side panniers that had never been seen before. Her spectacular hairstyle captivated the court as they waited for her. This was a significant moment in Jeanne's life as she was recognized and introduced as the official mistress of Louis XV. The king granted her a luxurious apartment in Versailles and other royal residences. She quickly acclimated to a life of luxury. Louis XV gave her a young Bengali slave named Zamor, whom she dressed in elegant attire. Jeanne grew fond of Zamor and began educating him. Every day, Jeanne's routine started at 9 a.m. when Zamor, the young Bengali slave, brought her a cup of warm chocolate. After that, she would choose the dress and jewelry she would wear and then be assisted by her hairdresser, Berlin, in styling and arranging her hair. For special occasions, a hairdresser named Nokal would come to attend to her appearance. After getting ready, Jeanne would receive visits from her friends as well as tradesmen such as dressmakers, jewelers, and artists offering their finest wares. Although Jeanne tended to be extravagant, she also had a kind heart and often provided assistance to those in need. One day, Jeanne heard about the situation of Comte and Comtesse de Lauzun, who were forcibly expelled from their chateau due to significant debts. They both had been sentenced to death as the Comtesse had committed murder against a bailiff and a police officer while resisting. When Madame de Béarn informed Jeanne about this, Jeanne pleaded with the king to grant them pardon. She refused to rise from her knees until the king agreed. Louis XV was touched by her plea and said, "Madam, I am glad the first favor you asked of me is an act of mercy." Furthermore, Jeanne was also visited by a man named Monsieur Mandeville, who begged for pardon for a young girl who had been sentenced to death by hanging for killing a baby after hiding the birth of a stillborn child. A letter written by Jeanne to the Chancellor of France successfully saved the girl's life. On various occasions, Jeanne demonstrated her concern for the fate of others and used her influence to perform acts of kindness. As the official chief mistress of the king, Jeanne became the center of attention at the palace. She often wore luxurious and expensive gowns adorned with diamonds encircling her neck and adorning her ears, further burdening the royal treasury. Jeanne had friends and enemies among the nobility. One of her fiercest rivals was Beatrix, Duchess de Gramont, who vainly sought to take the position of the king's mistress previously held by the Marquise de Pompadour. Beatrix and her brother had conspired to bring down Jeanne from the start. They even wrote slanderous pamphlets about Jeanne and the king. However, Jeanne later became acquainted with Duc d'Aiguillon, who sided with her in the competition against Duc de Choiseul. As Jeanne's power grew stronger at the court, Choiseul felt his influence threatened. Although the king believed that France was exhausted after the 7 Years' War, Choiseul decided that his country was still capable of fighting. He supported Spain in their battle against England to control the Falkland Islands. On Christmas Eve of 1771, Jeanne revealed Choiseul's evil plan to arrange a secret marriage between the king and Madame Pater. As a result, Choiseul was dismissed from his position and exiled from the court. Despite such political intrigues, Jeanne, unlike her predecessor Madame de Pompadour, had little interest in political affairs. She was more focused on fashion and acquiring new jewelry to enhance her elegant and captivating appearance. Although Jeanne was renowned for her kindness and support of artists, her popularity declined due to the king's depleted finances to fulfill her desires. Despite having a substantial monthly income, at one point amounting to 300,000 livres, Jeanne was always in debt and faced ongoing financial troubles. Despite attempts by Duc de Choiseul and Duc d'Aiguillon to overthrow her, Jeanne managed to maintain her position as the Maîtresse déclarée until the death of Louis XV. However, after Louis XV's death, Jeanne's fate drastically changed, and calamity began to befall her.